Have you ever felt a presence in the room with you, only to find no one there? What if that presence wasn't just a figment of your imagination? In this chilling true story, I'll take you back to a night when my mother and I encountered something unexplainable in a hotel room. A shadowy figure that left us questioning everything we believed about the supernatural. Join me as I recount the eerie details of that night, from the first terrifying sighting to the shocking revelation that my mother saw it too. Discover how this experience connected to a recent tragic loss and left us with lingering fears and unanswered questions. Was it just our minds playing tricks, or did we truly encounter a ghost? Stay tuned to find out the full story. If you love real-life horror stories and unexplained mysteries, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell icon so you never miss an update. Let's dive into the night that changed everything for us. Last year, my mother and I took a short trip and stayed in a hotel for a few nights. We were excited for a little getaway and had planned to visit some local attractions and just relax. The hotel was nice, with clean, comfortable rooms and friendly staff. It felt like the perfect place to unwind. Our room was on the third floor, with 2 beds side by side, a small desk by the window, and a flat-screen TV mounted on the wall. The curtains were thick, keeping the room dark at night and blocking out the city lights. It was a cozy, inviting space where we felt safe and comfortable. Every night, we followed the same routine. After a day of exploring, we would return to our room, change into our pajamas, and settle in for the night. We would watch some TV, chat about our day, and plan what we wanted to do next. It was a nice way to wind down and get ready for bed. My mom would usually fall asleep before me. She's always been a light sleeper, and the day's activities would tire her out quickly. I, on the other hand, liked to stay up a bit longer, scrolling through my phone or reading a book. The quiet of the hotel room was soothing, and I enjoyed those moments of solitude before drifting off to sleep. One particular night, everything seemed normal. We followed our usual routine, and my mom fell asleep shortly after we turned off the TV. I stayed up a little while longer, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling. The room was almost completely dark, with only a faint glow from the streetlights outside seeping in through the edges of the curtains. As I lay there, I started to feel a bit uneasy. I couldn't quite put my finger on why, but something felt off. I brushed it aside, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I turned over on my side, trying to get comfortable and fall asleep. That's when I saw it. About 2 meters away from my bed, there was a silhouette of a human figure. It was just standing there, motionless. My first thought was that it must be a shadow cast by something in the room, but as I looked around, I couldn't see anything that could make such a shape. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was nothing, just a trick of the light. But the more I looked, the more convinced I became that it was not just a shadow. It was too defined, too real. My heart started to race, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I sat up in bed and turned on the bedside lamp. The silhouette disappeared immediately. I sighed in relief, thinking that maybe it was just my imagination after all. But when I turned off the light, the silhouette reappeared in the exact same spot. Panic started to set in. I got out of bed and walked around the room, trying to find the source of the shadow. I moved the curtains, checked behind the furniture, and even looked under the beds. There was nothing that could be causing the silhouette. Everything was in its place, just as it had been when we first arrived. Feeling more and more unsettled, I climbed back into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin. I turned the light on and off a few more times, each time hoping the silhouette would be gone when the room went dark. But it was always there, standing in the same spot, watching me. I didn't know what to do. I was too scared to wake my mom, not wanting to alarm her. Instead, I turned away from the silhouette, facing the wall, and tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. I squeezed my eyes shut and eventually fell into a restless sleep, haunted by the image of the shadowy figure. The next morning, I told my mom about what I had seen. She listened patiently but reassured me that it was probably just a trick of the light or my mind playing tricks on me. She suggested we go about our day and try not to think about it too much. I agreed, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. One night, after a long day of exploring the city, my mom and I settled into our usual routine at the hotel. She fell asleep quickly, leaving me to my own devices. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone and trying to relax before falling asleep myself. The room was dark, with only a faint glow from the streetlights outside filtering through the curtains. As I lay there, I started to feel a strange sense of unease. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the exhaustion from the day catching up with me. I turned over, hoping to find a more comfortable position, when something caught my eye. About 2 meters away from my bed, I saw a dark human-shaped silhouette. At first, I thought it must be a shadow cast by something in the room. Maybe a piece of furniture or the way the light was coming through the window. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the longer I looked at it, the more real it seemed. The silhouette was perfectly still, and it didn't have any discernible features. It was just a dark human-shaped shadow standing there. I started to feel my heart race, and a chill ran down my spine. I told myself to calm down, that it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something was very wrong. In an attempt to prove to myself that it was just a shadow, I reached over and turned on the bedside lamp. As soon as the light filled the room, the silhouette disappeared. I let out a sigh of relief, thinking that maybe it really was just a trick of the light. But when I turned the light off again, the silhouette reappeared in the exact same spot. Panic started to set in. I sat up in bed, staring at the silhouette, trying to figure out what could be causing it. I looked around the room, but there was nothing that could be casting such a shadow. Everything was in its place, just as it had been when we first arrived. I turned the light on and off several more times, each time hoping that the silhouette would be gone when the room went dark. But it was always there, standing in the same spot, unmoving. I started to feel a sense of dread wash over me, and I didn't know what to do. I considered waking my mom, but I didn't want to scare her. Instead, I decided to get out of bed and investigate further. I walked around the room, moving the curtains, checking behind the furniture, and even looking under the beds. There was nothing out of place, and nothing that could be casting the shadow. Feeling more and more unsettled, I climbed back into bed and pulled the covers up to my chin. I turned away from the silhouette, facing the wall, and tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. I squeezed my eyes shut, but I couldn't stop thinking about the dark figure standing so close to my bed. Despite my fear, exhaustion eventually took over, and I fell into a restless sleep. I dreamt of shadows and dark figures, and when I woke up the next morning, I felt more tired than when I had gone to bed. The memory of the silhouette was still fresh in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. At breakfast, I told my mom about what I had seen. She listened patiently but reassured me that it was probably just a trick of the light or my mind playing tricks on me. She suggested we go about our day and try not to think about it too much. I agreed, but the memory of the shadowy figure lingered in the back of my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. Over the next few nights, my fear and paranoia only grew. Each night, I would lie in bed, waiting for the silhouette to reappear. But strangely, it didn't. The room was just as dark, the streetlights outside casting the same faint glow, but the shadowy figure was gone. It was almost as if that one night had been a bizarre, isolated incident. I couldn't let it go, though. I kept replaying that night in my mind, trying to find a logical explanation. I convinced myself to search the room again, hoping to discover something I might have missed. I looked behind the curtains, moved the furniture, and even checked under the beds once more. There was nothing out of place, nothing that could cast a human-shaped shadow. Despite not seeing the silhouette again, the memory haunted me. Every time I turned off the lights, I expected to see it standing there, watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. It was as if my fear from that night had taken root, refusing to let go. I started to sleep with the bedside lamp on, hoping the light would keep the shadow at bay. My mom noticed, of course, and asked me about it. I told her I was just having trouble sleeping, but I didn't mention the silhouette again. I didn't want her to think I was losing my mind. During the day, I tried to act normal, but the fear was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. I couldn't focus on anything, constantly distracted by the memory of that dark figure. My mom and I continued our activities, visiting local attractions and enjoying our trip, but I couldn't fully relax. One evening, as we were getting ready for bed, my mom commented on how well I seemed to be handling things, considering the shadow incident. She smiled and reassured me again that it was probably nothing. I forced a smile in return, not wanting to worry her, but inside, I was still terrified. That night, as I lay in bed with the light on, I couldn't help but wonder why the silhouette had appeared only once. What was different about that night? Why had it chosen to show itself to me? I felt a chill run down my spine as I considered the possibilities. Maybe it was just a trick of the light, as my mom had suggested. Maybe my mind had been playing tricks on me, creating a shadow out of nothing. But deep down, I couldn't believe that. The silhouette had been too real, too tangible. It was as if something or someone had been in the room with me. The next day, I found myself researching the hotel, looking for any history of strange occurrences or ghost sightings. I didn't find anything significant, just a few minor stories that didn't match what I had experienced. It was frustrating, not having any answers. The mystery only deepened my fear. By the end of our stay, I was exhausted from the lack of sleep and constant anxiety. I was relieved to be leaving the hotel, hoping that being at home would help me forget about the silhouette. But even as we packed up and drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. Back at home, I finally felt a sense of relief. The familiar surroundings and the comfort of my own bed helped me start to relax. I tried to push the memory of the silhouette to the back of my mind, telling myself it was all in the past. But every now and then, in the dark of the night, I would find myself glancing at the corner of my room, half expecting to see that shadowy figure again. The experience left a lasting impact on me. It made me question what I believed about the world and the things we can't explain. I still don't know what I saw that night in the hotel, but I do know that it changed me. The fear and uncertainty lingered, a reminder that sometimes, the things we can't see are the most terrifying of all. The morning after I first saw the silhouette, I woke up feeling exhausted. The memory of the shadowy figure still lingered in my mind, but the daylight brought a small sense of relief. My mom was already awake and getting ready for breakfast. I decided to tell her about what I had seen. Mom, I started hesitantly, last night I saw something strange in our room. She looked up from her cup of coffee, concern in her eyes. What do you mean, sweetie? I took a deep breath and recounted the events of the night before, explaining how I saw a human-shaped silhouette standing near my bed, how I tried to ignore it, and how it disappeared when I turned on the light but reappeared when I turned it off. I described how I had checked the room thoroughly and found nothing that could cast such a shadow. My mom listened patiently, but when I finished, she gave me a reassuring smile. It sounds like your imagination was playing tricks on you, as she said gently. You were probably just tired from our long day. I nodded, wanting to believe her. And maybe you're right, I said, though deep down, I wasn't convinced. I couldn't shake the feeling that what I had seen was real. Why don't we go out and enjoy the day? My mom suggested. A change of scenery might help take your mind off things. I agreed, and we spent the day exploring the city, visiting museums, and trying new foods. It was a welcome distraction, and for a while, I managed to push the memory of the silhouette to the back of my mind. By the time we returned to the hotel that evening, I was feeling more at ease. That night, as we got ready for bed, I found myself glancing nervously around the room. My mom noticed and gave me a reassuring hug. There's nothing to worry about, as she said. Just get some rest. I climbed into bed and turned off the light, my heart pounding in my chest. I lay there, staring into the darkness, waiting to see if the silhouette would reappear. But this time, the room remained empty. There was no shadowy figure standing near my bed, and I finally allowed myself to relax. The following nights were much the same. Each time I turned off the light, I held my breath, waiting to see if the silhouette would return. But it never did. The shadowy figure seemed to have been a one-time occurrence, and as the days went by, I started to feel a sense of relief. My mom's reassurances helped as well. She continued to remind me that it was likely just my imagination, and her calm demeanor made it easier for me to believe her. I began to sleep more soundly, the fear slowly fading away. On our last night at the hotel, I realized I hadn't thought about the silhouette in a few days. The sense of dread that had gripped me so tightly was finally loosening its hold. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me as I drifted off to sleep, thankful that the shadowy figure seemed to be nothing more than a fleeting nightmare. When we returned home, I was relieved to be back in my own room, surrounded by familiar things. The experience at the hotel had left a mark on me, but I was determined to move past it. I focused on the positive memories from our trip and tried to put the shadowy figure out of my mind. The morning conversation with my mom had helped to ground me, to remind me that not everything needs an explanation. Sometimes, the mind plays tricks, and that's all it is. Though I would never forget that eerie night, I learned to find comfort in the rational explanations my mom provided. Life returned to normal, and the shadowy figure became a distant memory. But every so often, when the lights were off and the room was dark, I couldn't help but glance around, just to make sure. A few days after we returned home from our trip, life started to feel normal again. I was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by books and notes, trying to catch up on some studying. My mom was at the stove, cooking dinner. The familiar sounds and smells of home were comforting, and I felt more relaxed than I had in weeks. As I scribbled in my notebook, my mom turned around and asked casually, "Hey, do you remember that shadow you saw in the hotel?" I looked up, surprised she brought it up again. Yeah, I remember," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Why?" She hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "I need to tell you something. I saw it too." My heart skipped a beat. What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to say anything at the time because I didn't want to scare you," as she said, turning off the stove and coming over to sit next to me. But that night, I woke up and saw the same shadow standing by your bed. I thought it was just my imagination, or maybe a trick of the light. I didn't want to make you more frightened than you already were." A cold shiver ran down my spine. The fact that my mom, who had tried so hard to reassure me, had seen the same thing made the whole experience even more terrifying. Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, feeling a mix of fear and betrayal. I thought if I admitted it, it would only make things worse," as she said gently. I hoped that by not acknowledging it, it would go away. And it did, didn't it? The shadow didn't come back after that night. I nodded, trying to process what she was saying. The rational part of my mind wanted to cling to the idea that it was just a coincidence, that we both imagined it. But the other part of me, the part that had felt the cold, creeping fear, knew it was something more. Do you think it was a ghost?" I asked hesitantly. My mom took a deep breath. "I don't know. I've always been skeptical about these things, but it was strange. Too strange to ignore. And there's something else you should know." She paused, looking down at her hands. A few days before we went on our trip, my best friend from college, the one I told you about, she passed away. It was sudden, and I didn't get a chance to say goodbye. The night you saw the shadow, I had been writing a letter to her, just to get some closure. I stared at her, my mind racing. "You think the shadow was her?" "I don't know," as she said softly. But it's possible. Maybe she wanted to say goodbye too." We sat in silence for a moment, both lost in our thoughts. The idea that the shadow could have been the spirit of my mom's friend was both comforting and unsettling. It made the experience feel more personal, less like a random haunting and more like a message from beyond. Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. I didn't want to burden you with my grief," as she said, reaching out to hold my hand. And I didn't want to scare you even more. But now that we're home and things are back to normal, I thought you should know the truth. I squeezed her hand, feeling a strange sense of relief. Knowing that my mom had seen the shadow too, and that it might have been connected to someone she loved, made the whole experience feel a little less frightening. It didn't make it any less real, but it gave it context, a reason. From that day on, we talked more openly about our experiences and feelings. The shadow became a part of our story, a strange and unsettling chapter that we had lived through together. And though we still didn't have all the answers, we found comfort in sharing our fears and supporting each other. In the end, the chilling admission brought us closer, helping us to face the unknown together. And while the memory of the shadow still lingered, it no longer held the same power over us. We had faced it, acknowledged it, and found a way to move forward. As my mom and I sat at the kitchen table, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. My mom explained her belief that the shadow we saw in the hotel room might have been the ghost of her best friend from college, who had tragically taken her own life just a few days before our trip. The realization sent a shiver down my spine, but it also made a strange kind of sense. I didn't want to say anything at the time because I was still processing her death, and my mom said softly. Writing that letter was my way of saying goodbye, of finding some closure. I think maybe she came to say goodbye too. She told me how she had spent hours that night, after I had fallen asleep, pouring her heart out onto paper. She wrote about their memories together, the pain of losing her, and the things she wished she had said. My mom believed that her friend's spirit might have been drawn to the intense emotion she was feeling, and the shadow was her way of reaching out one last time. Listening to her, I felt a mix of fear and sadness. The idea that a spirit could cross over to our world was terrifying, but the thought that it was someone my mom loved and missed made it more poignant. It wasn't just a random haunting, it was a deeply personal farewell. After connecting these dots, my mom and I both felt a strange sense of closure. It didn't erase the fear we had felt that night, but it provided a reason for the shadow's presence. It transformed a terrifying encounter into a final act of love and farewell. Do you think she'll come back? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, and my mom replied, squeezing my hand. But I like to think she found peace after that night. Maybe she just needed to know that I was okay, and that I still cared. As we sat there, the kitchen filled with the comforting aroma of dinner cooking on the stove, I felt a small weight lift from my shoulders. The lingering fear from that night hadn't completely disappeared, but it had lessened. The mystery of the shadowy figure wasn't fully solved, but we had a plausible explanation that brought some peace. Reflecting on the experience, I realized how much it had changed me. I had always been skeptical about ghosts and the supernatural, but now I wasn't so sure. If ghosts did exist, I believed I had seen one that night. It was a thought that was both chilling and oddly comforting. The fear and mystery of that encounter stayed with me, serving as a reminder of the things we don't fully understand. It made me more open to the possibility that there are forces beyond our comprehension, and that sometimes, those forces are driven by love and the need for closure. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, my mom and I talked about that night less and less. Life went on, but the memory of the shadow never completely faded. It became a part of our family's history, a story we would share with a select few who we thought might understand. Every now and then, I would find myself thinking about the shadow, wondering if it had been real or just a figment of our imaginations. But deep down, I knew the truth. The shadow had been real, a manifestation of my mom's grief and love for her friend. The experience left me with a lingering sense of curiosity about the afterlife and the possibility of ghosts. It was a mystery I knew I might never fully understand, but it had opened my mind to new possibilities. In the end, the shadowy figure in the hotel room wasn't just a source of fear, it was a reminder of the connections we share with those we love, even after they're gone. It taught me that sometimes, the most terrifying experiences can also be the most meaningful. As I looked back on that night, I felt a mix of emotions. Fear, sadness, and a strange sense of peace. The memory of the shadow would always be with me, a haunting reminder of the night I came face to face with the unknown. but it was also a testament to the enduring power of love and the lengths to which our loved ones will go to say goodbye.